All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today, connecting with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. My name is Lori, and I'll be managing this session. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us okay. So if you are able to help me out, on your right, you should see the GoToWebinar panel, and towards the bottom, you should see a tab for questions. If you are able to type something in that question box that lets me know you can hear us, that would be awesome. All right. Looks like I have a couple of folks helping me out here. Thank you so much. All right, looks like we're good. So today we are fortunate to be joined by Game Commission staff members Tom Keller, our dove biologist, and Lauren Ferrari, our biological and visitor center manager at Middle Creek. They will be showing us how to band mourning doves and discussing why that research is so important for this popular game bird. We're going to shoot to keep this session within your lunch hour. We expect it to last around 40 minutes, then some time for questions. It will be recorded. You can send us questions by typing in that question tab at the right of your screen. And I think with that, we are ready to go. So Tom, Lauren, thanks so much for joining us today. Is there anything you'd like to share about your work with the agency before you get started?
Sure. Good afternoon, folks. This is Tom Keller, and I serve as the dove biologist as well as the quail and pheasant biologist for the Game Commission. Doves take up a decent amount of my time, particularly with banding as well as our managed dove field program. And we have quite a few banders throughout the state, which we'll talk about today, and exactly why we do that. But it's a really exciting part of my job to be able to manage for mourning doves in Pennsylvania, and I really have a real heart for these little birds. So looking forward to talking with you today, and I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today and tuning in. As Laurie mentioned, I am the Biological and Visitor Center Manager at Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area, and that is where today's From the Field episode was filmed. This presentation is the third episode of our From the Field series, which aims to give you a feel for being in the field with us, with the Pennsylvania Game Commission's wildlife professionals. From the Field is brought to you by Wildlife on Wi-Fi, which is the Pennsylvania Game Commission's platform for remote learning and virtual lessons. Because this episode was filmed outside in the field, we recommend that you turn your speakers up as high as they can go so you can hear everything that's happening with us out there. And other than that, Laurie, we are good to go.
Okay, I am going to share a video that was filmed out there in the field. And if you have connected by phone and are just listening, we found that some phones can't support the audio this way. So hoping that you do not get disconnected. Crossing my fingers. If you get an error message asking you to use the audio of your device, try that. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Lauren Ferrari, and we are with Tom Keller with another segment from the field. Tom, what are we going to be talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about mourning doves, and that's part of what I do here for the Game Commission is act as a mourning dove biologist and try to manage some of the research activities as well as assist with some of the habitat work that goes on for mourning doves here in the state. Mourning doves, if you're not familiar with them, they are a very popular game bird throughout the country, but there's a lot of states that don't allow dove hunting, and so we are one of the states that do, and we're actually, besides Rhode Island, we're the furthest to the northeast that allows dove hunting, and it is a very popular game bird. We estimate the population of about 350 million birds throughout the country.
Wow.
And each year in the U.S. we harvest around 20 million total. So it's very popular, particularly in a lot of the southern states and even down into the southwest, so down into Texas and Arizona and things like that. So but some of the things that we do here in Pennsylvania We do a lot of dove banding, and so we actually band quite a few doves. We usually band between 800 and 1,000 doves every year in the state. And that banding effort is extremely important because that kind of gives us information to help manage doves and ties into what's called the Dove Harvest Management Strategy, which is an overarching plan. For the nation, for dove management, doves are considered migratory birds, and again, it's a migratory game bird. So when you're managing a migratory bird, you have to look at it on more of like a larger scale besides just like a resident bird, let's say rough grouse, where we kind of manage in state. So with mourning doves, the banding effort gives us a couple pieces of information that tie into determining population, which helps us set our seasons and bag limits for doves here in Pennsylvania. Because it's migratory, there is a federal framework that we have to work within. And so that framework gives us a maximum of 90 days, and we can start that in September 1st. We can't start any sooner than that. And then we can usually go into mid-January, which we generally go into the first week of January. Pennsylvania has enough mourning doves that we can actually take that full 90 days, and we do. We start that beginning of September. Season usually runs up through the beginning of deer season, goes out for the deer season, and then comes right back in and runs through usually the first week in January there. So we have a lot of great opportunity in Pennsylvania for hunting doves. But some of the things that banding gives us is it gives us recruitment. So how many young birds are being brought into the population each year. It gives us a survival estimate, which is also critical for determining population. And it kind of gives us a proportion of adults to juveniles, which is also important when we're looking at setting these seasons and bag limits each year.
With you mentioned previously about migratory and game species. Can you just kind of dive in a little bit for users who aren't aware of what a game species means, and
Sure.
just when you're talking about migration, where would doves go to? Where are they coming from? Are they leaving Pennsylvania, and where are they going to?
Yeah, good question. So we are in the breeding range for doves, and so we actually do have a lot of recruitment here in Pennsylvania for part of the population. It is considered a migratory bird, but actually what we found, and a lot of it's through banding data, is that there's a large proportion of doves each year that actually don't leave Pennsylvania. So I would say the majority of birds actually don't leave the state. They might do a small localized migration each year. So depending on where they're hatched, if there's food available, they'll stay pretty close to home there. If there's not, they may migrate to an area where there's a lot of good food, which we can talk about later. But of course we do have some that do migrate, and so we've had band recoveries as far down as Florida, as far to the southwest as Texas and Kansas. So we do get some migration, obviously, out of the state, but I would say the large majority will actually stay in Pennsylvania. And as far as a game species, it's basically just a species that can be hunted. So we have non-game. There's a lot more non-game wildlife in Pennsylvania than there is game. And like I mentioned before, not all states consider doves a game species, which is kind of interesting as well. So as soon as you go up to New York or New Jersey, it's not considered a game bird, so they can't be hunted in these other states.
Okay. So what is the metal box here in front of you, and how does that tie in with banding?
Yep. So for us to band doves, it's a little different than geese or ducks, where like with geese, they'll molt all their feathers at the same time, their flight feathers, and so we can easily just round them up. For doves, they molt generally their flight feathers on each wing, one feather at a time. So this allows them to be able to continue to fly, and that's the majority of birds do that, so they can continue to fly. So in order to catch them, we have actually got to use a trap, and so that's what we have here. This is a walk-in trap, and so the trap's pretty simple. It's just a 2-inch by 1-inch wire, and we build these in-house, and then it has funnels in it. And I don't know if you can see these funnels. It's very similar to like a minnow trap for most folks that have used minnow traps before. The dove, what we'll do is we'll come into an area, And before we even set our traps, for about 2 weeks, we'll find a location that is attractive to doves. We'll start to put bait down. And so what we use for bait here is primarily millet or safflower. We'll put that down, get the birds used to actually coming into that specific spot in order to kind of continue to draw numbers and attract a lot of birds to that area. And doves are pretty habitual to that. So once they get habituated to that area, they'll keep coming back every day for food. And so after about 2 weeks, what we do is just actually place this trap on top of that baited area, and the birds will work around it, and they'll find this funnel here in the front, and there's one on the side, and they'll actually work into that funnel. And then once they get into the interior, into this area, they can't actually find their way back out. So they'll kind of work around trying to get out, but they're not able to actually figure out that they need to go right back out that funnel. So that's how we trap the birds. And then once we trap them, then we can easily just open this door on top like so and reach in and grab them. And then we put them in a soft breathable cloth bag or a netted bag. And then from there we can handle the birds pretty easily, and they're fairly easy to handle, pretty docile. And then we can actually go ahead and put the band on and then collect some other data that we collect from those birds. Again, to kind of give us that information we need to make good decisions on seasons and bag limits.
So Tom, you mentioned that we ban 800 to 1,000 birds in the state. What does that look like nationwide?
Yeah, excellent question. So overall nationwide, we banned around 46,000 birds,
wow,
which is pretty substantial. But our return rate's actually only 2 to 3%, at least here in Pennsylvania, and that might be a little bit higher in some other areas, maybe up to 5–6%, but it's still fairly low. So to know what that return rate is, and to know that we need to gather a certain amount of data on all the birds, or on the dove population, it's important that we get a lot of bands out there to try to make sure we have enough to make solid decisions on that are statistically significant. So the banding data is really important, and that's why we try to contribute each year with the birds that we have. And I would say, overall, I think I mentioned there's about 20 million harvested nationwide. Here in Pennsylvania, we have about 100,000 harvested each year, and we estimate around 16,000 dove hunters in Pennsylvania. So we still have a substantial amount of hunters. That number, of course, has dropped over time, like most of our hunter numbers have, and of course harvest kind of follows that. So we see a decline in harvest over time, but that's not necessarily a decline in population. That's more of a kind of a reflection of declining hunters over time.
So even though there's really good habitat in other locations, sometimes dove like to be where people are, as Tom mentioned earlier. So we do have some dove traps here in this gravel area down below us. And so we're going to check them and show you what the dove banding process looks like.
So here we have a couple of doves in a trap. We try to get them out as quickly as we possibly can, and that kind of helps prevent injury. We're going to close the trap back up, and Lauren got the other dove that we caught there and released some of the non-target. So of course we get some non-target birds that come into these traps. And then what we're using is a very soft cloth sack to put the birds in and to hold the birds in the meantime before we start to band. So we can actually, we'll just work right here off of this trap.
Yeah, so the other birds that were in the traps were just some house finches. I think there was a starling in one. So we don't do anything with them. We just let them go. So most of our traps are most of the traps are made so that those smaller birds can get out, but we have a few different style traps here. So.
Okay, so I'm just going to secure the bag with my knee, and that'll just keep the birds from being able to pop out. There's a few different ways you can hold a dove. So you can hold it like this. Generally, a lot of times when you're holding a bird of this size, you're going to keep 2 fingers on either side of the head. And basically, you're trying to keep their wings from flapping. You don't want to let them injure themselves by trying to get away. This is an easy way to hold them. Well, the other way that I generally will hold a bird is like this. This makes it a little easier for banding. And again, when I'm training folks on how to band, generally what I tell them is, it's kind of like when you're holding, like when I hold my daughter's hand, if we're going to cross the street or something. So well, obviously I'm not trying to crush her hand, but I'm holding it firmly enough so that the bird's wings, it doesn't get any room to be able to move its wings and escape, or like I said, to hurt itself. So it's kind of a general rule of thumb is how you want to hold the bird when you're banding, and just keeping that in mind kind of subconsciously while you're doing the work that you're doing.
It's a good metaphor. I've never thought of it.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it. This also gives me access to both legs, so I can kind of extend each leg and then get the band on the leg. So the first thing we'll do is just kind of a general overall check on the bird. We can kind of look at its overall health. I don't see any glaring problems with this bird. And we also are going to check for bands. So a lot of times, I wouldn't say a lot of times, but occasionally we'll recapture birds from previous years or even from this year's banding effort. Maybe we might recapture a bird. So taking a look at their legs, I don't see any bands, so this will be a bird that we're going to go ahead and band. And so what we'll do...
I did get the one ready for you.
Oh, perfect. Yep.
But I can hold anything up you'd like.
Yep, so here we have our bands. This is a smaller size band. These are called butt end bands, and I'll actually take this one out so you can see it. So basically, some bands are locking bands, or they might have a rivet on them. This band here, just these 2 ends close together. And here you can see on the band, there's a website there. It's www.reportband.gov. And then there's each bird gets its own distinct number, or what I would say is like a serial number, just its own distinct number. And this number will be attached to this bird and the data that we collect from this bird. Okay, so we're gonna take this band and put it in our banding pliers. These pliers are made specifically for this size band. And I'll show you how they work. The nose will go in and take a band off. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my pinky to kind of extend the leg enough so that I can get the band on. I'm gonna put the band on, and I'm gonna turn my pliers to make sure that this rear toe doesn't get accidentally banded when we do that. Okay, that can occasionally happen. So here we're gonna put it on, and then I'm gonna close the band. So we gently close the band. They are really soft aluminum, so we wanna make sure we don't really crush it on there. We have to be really careful. We want lots of movement with that band so that it doesn't impede the bird at all. But we also want to try to close up this gap as much as we can. So I'm going to take my pliers and very carefully try to close that gap up a little bit, which can be a little tricky. These pliers don't have any kind of grip on them to actually help you close it. So there, we close it a little, and then I'm actually going to crimp it this way, and this will help kind of close any kind of gap up that we might have there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin that band around that bird's leg to make sure that there's nothing catching its leg that might tear the skin. And again, this gap is closed so that while it's walking around on the ground, it wouldn't catch on vegetation or anything like that and cause an impediment for the bird and its survival. Okay, so the first thing we always do is band the bird. And the reason that is sometimes they escape, particularly when we start to collect some other data. And so we got the band on, and now the next step is to look at molt. So we're going to take the wing and gently extend the wing, And as I mentioned earlier, when these birds molt, they molt one flight feather at a time in each of their sections of feathers. So right here we're looking at the primary feathers. This is really what gives them lift when they come off the ground and are able to fly. And we're going to count backwards with our primaries. So starting at the outside leading edge, we're going to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Now we see a missing feather here, and there should be a total of 10. So we're assuming this is 4, 3, 2, 1. And I don't know if you can tell the difference, but here, this is the last primary, and this is getting into the secondaries. So that's kind of where the separation point is. And so if you can't tell, the molting feather here is number 4, and you can see it growing in. So once they get there, basically the old feather will get pushed out when the new feather starts to come in. And so this feather's about half grown. And I don't know if you can also tell, another way to tell is just looking at the color of the feathers and the wear on the feathers. And I'll kind of straighten this out to show you what I mean. These feathers that haven't been molted are a lighter brown color. And the feathers that have been molted, 1 through 3, and especially number 4, are much darker, like slate gray color. You can also look at the tips of these feathers. So if you look at the tips of these last couple, they're fairly frayed and worn. That's from taking off on the ground. And these here are actually pretty clean, nice clean straight edge on them. So we know that the molt on this is 4. Now the next step is to look at whether it's an adult or a juvenile. So the way that we tell that is we look at the primary coverts. So the primary coverts are this next set of feathers that are actually on top of the primaries. They actually molt at the same rate, so you can see these primary coverts are like a dark slate gray, very similar to the primaries that are below them. But these here are still this lighter brown, and the biggest thing we're looking for is this buffy colored tip on the feather. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's a really buffy colored kind of leading edge to that feather. It's on all of these. That indicates that it's a juvenile. So this bird would have been hatched this year. That's how we usually do it. Now there's some other kind of hints here. You can see a lot of these feathers on the head are starting to kind of pop out. Some are still in their sheaths. So you can tell when that bird kind of looks a little bit disheveled, that's generally a sign that it's a juvenile. But really these primary coverts are the primary way that we know. Now once we determine that it's a juvenile, we cannot tell what the sex is. So we have to have an adult to be able to sex it. So we'll always go with unknown sex when it's a juvenile. Okay, so this bird, we've collected all the information we need from it.
Tom, I'm just going to make sure, and I did check it before I put the band in, but
Sure.
Since I kind of jumped ahead of you, the
Yep.
band, the last 3 digits of that band number is 690.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's a good point, Lauren. It's easy to get out of place, especially when you have a lot of birds you're trying to handle, and it's best to try to keep your data in order. And so that's, with having Lauren to help me out with that, that's been extremely important to make sure that I'm on track. And it does help. A lot of times, you know, we're out in the field doing this ourselves, and so you kind of have to do all that yourselves, but if you can work together, it certainly makes life a lot easier.
And these bands, Tom mentioned, are in sequential order, so the next one would have the next preceding number, so it's easy to keep track with that on your data sheet here. So sorry I jumped ahead.
No, that's really helpful. So when we get to release this bird, again, we know that it's fairly healthy and ready to go. What we want to do is just kind of cradle it and open our hands gently, and that bird, if it doesn't fly off, which a lot of times they'll just sit there, then they'll fly off, or you can give them a little bit of a bump sometimes. So we're going to get the next bird out and begin.
Does it help you to do the band again for you?
Yeah, if that's helpful, that'd be great. Yep. Okay. So we're going to take another look at this bird. Looks fairly healthy. I don't see any major problems. There's no bands, but you can see he's trying to get away. So we have our banding pliers that Lauren loaded up for me, and we're going to go ahead again, remember, we're going to place that band first. We want to get a band on there if nothing else. And we're going to try to close that gap up.
And I realize that we, looks like we use different instruments to band our doves. So.
Yeah, yeah, and I apologize. I look like I don't know what I'm doing here, but
no,
I do have a pair of different banding pliers. There's different companies that make different pliers, but these are actually probably some of the best pliers that are made out there. And then again, we got that gap closed. We're going to spin that band to make sure it's not restricting any blood flow. It's not catching on the skin. And now we can go ahead and determine mold on this bird. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, open that wing, and I'll give you a second to see if you can figure out which feather is molted there. So if you count backwards from 10, starting with your leading feather, what feather do you think that is? So it's actually feather 6 is your molt. Okay, and you can see, again, it's this 6 is coming in very nicely there. I don't know if you can see the color change. You have your dark slate gray to your kind of lighter brown. You have this kind of ratty looking tips of these primaries here on the outer edge. Now that we know we're molt, let's go ahead and take a look to see what our age is. So I'll give you a second to take a look. Again, we're looking at these primary coverts, and we're looking for buffy edges on those primary coverts. So do you see any buffy edges on there? And I would say yes. So we can see these last couple primary coverts have buffy edges. So buffy edges tells us that this bird is what's called a hatch year bird, or this is the year it was hatched. So it's a juvenile bird. So knowing that it's a juvenile, we can't determine what the sex is, okay? So this bird, we have all the data we need on it. It'll be a hatch year, unknown sex. We have our band and our molt. So we're gonna let him go.
So Tom, why do you, with the molt, like what is understanding where they're at in that process?
Yeah.
How does that help?
Yeah, that's a good question. So depending on where they're at with molt, that also kind of helps you key in on whether it's an adult or a juvenile or what the sex is. So there's a key that we use, and if they're molting the last 3 feathers, so 10, 9, or 8, that means that we can't really determine what the age is on that bird because it's so late in the season. So that bird was probably hatched sometime in early to mid-spring, potentially early summer. And so what they'll do is they'll hatch, they'll grow their feathers, they'll grow enough feathers for flight, basically, so they'll grow a full set of feathers. And then even that hatch year bird will then begin to molt that same year and grow a whole new set of feathers. So once they get so developed in their molt, it might be a hatch year, but it's working on its 2nd set of feathers. And then once it's so developed, we can't actually tell if it's a hatch year or if it's an adult. So yeah, so excellent question. We need to know that so that we can determine what the age is.
Seems like doves are pretty, I don't want to say high stress, but they definitely flop around a lot.
They do, yep, and that's again why we use this protective bag. They can flop and it doesn't hurt them. Again, that's the main thing. We're not necessarily worried about us hurting them, but we're just worried about them hurting themselves. So, okay. So again, we're going to take this bird out, kind of give it a quick once over. Don't see any major health issues or anything like that. It looks fairly healthy. And what's interesting with these birds, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is where the crop is, this area here. And I don't know if you can see this is pretty well pushed out. And that means, and if you push on it, you can actually feel these safflower seeds inside the crop. So it's almost not quite the golf ball size, but at least like a little rubber bouncy ball size of safflower seeds in the crop. And the crop is expandable. It's like a thin skin right underneath these feathers. And you can actually kind of push on that a little bit. It doesn't hurt the bird, but you can actually feel that bird is full of seed. And I would assume it's full of these safflower seeds where it came in to feed first thing this morning. So we're gonna go ahead, we got our band loaded up. I'm going to go ahead, extend the leg here a little bit. Put our band on. And we'll work on trying to get it closed here. And again, with doves especially, because these bands are so soft, you want to be really careful, fairly gentle, to make sure that you don't push that band too tight. Okay, so we kind of close that gap. Now we're gonna close it this way a little bit. And again, I'm trying to be very careful not to close it too much. Okay, so now we have that band closed. We're gonna spin that to make sure it's okay. Set our pliers here.
Is it normal for them to lose a few feathers in this process?
It is, yeah. Just keep in mind, it's not just their flight feathers they're molting. It's feathers all over their body. Again, they're not all coming out at the same time, but when you saw that last one take off, a lot of those feathers came out because they were ready to come out. So, you know, they're certainly not naked when they're flying away, but it is normal. That's a good question. Okay, so let's take a look at this one and see what you guys think. So you can see this first primary is a little bit bent up, but if we count backwards, 10, 9, 8, 7, and number 6 would be where our molt is. So this is a pretty clear molt. And then let's also take a look. Boy, this is a good one here to look at as far as age goes. So again, we're looking at the primary coverts, and are we seeing any buffy tips there? Yes, we are. We're seeing a few of these. So here's one, and here's about 3 here. And again, we're looking at kind of that color of the feathers as well, and you can see which ones have been molted. So these are these adult looking feathers, primary coverts, nice and gray, no leading buffy edge, and here we have that edge pretty clearly defined. So this is again another juvenile. It's typical, the large majority of your birds will be juvenile, so that's fairly typical. So again, if we know it's juvenile, then we know we can't sex it. So we're gonna turn this one loose, and it looks like it's ready to go.
So we're catching a lot of younger birds. Is that also normal?
That is normal. This time of year, you have a big flush of hatchlings that are coming off the nest, starting to flock up a little bit and feed. They seem like they're more readily interested to go into the cages, whereas an adult, if you watch birds working your bait, an adult may hang back a little bit, and you'll see juveniles kind of jump right in there usually. So
set the groundwork for
yeah,
the older
exactly.
birds.
Yep. And it's a good thing. When you see a lot of juveniles, you know that there was good recruitment into the population. So that's an exciting thing, you know, that we know we'll probably have another great season because of such good recruitment. So we just completed banding a handful of birds here that we caught. And again, that ties into a lot of our dove management, a lot of the research, and a lot of the decision making that we use to get to population management, and some of our other things like survival and recruitment, things that go into that management. If you're interested to learn more about doves, I'd encourage you to go to our website. And so there's a couple different things there. You can go under hunting and under small game, and we have a specific page for doves. You can see some of our research, past reports that we have there, past annual reports that talk a little bit about what we're working on in depth. And also there's a story map. And so if you're interested in the dove fields, the managed dove fields, and our land management staff has worked really hard this year. We've got over 550 acres coming out and managed dove fields. A great opportunity to get out and do some dove hunting. That story map provides you with some excellent information, not just on where these fields are, although it will show you exactly where the fields are. It also provides good information on hunting. And so if it's brand new to you and you're trying to get into it, that's a great resource to try to learn more about it and then get out in the field and enjoy this wonderful resource that we've been given.
Great. Tom, thank you so much for coming out and showcasing everything here. And thank you guys for joining us for another segment from the field.
Wonderful. All right, that was good. I hope everybody was able to hear most of that. It sounds like some folks had trouble. If you're one of them and you wouldn't mind sharing what device and browser you were using to try and connect, that might help us troubleshoot where the problem lies. So I do have a question here from Carlene, and she would like to know if you guys know about how many birds you band every year.
Yeah, good question, Carlene. So we band anywhere from about 800 to 1,000, some years even up to about 1,200. A lot of that's dependent on additional research projects that we might have. So occasionally we'll do some reward banding where we'll actually put 2 bands on. Well, there'll be a silver band like the one in the video, and then there'll be a matching gold band on the other leg, and that is actually worth $100 to the person that would call, or actually there's no longer a call-in number, but just use the website there to turn that in. And so some of that's used for different research projects, and it's also very dependent on how many banders we have that year, and as well as the weather and how things kind of cooperate or don't cooperate with us. But yeah, great question.
All right, Lauren, do you know how many specifically at Middle Creek?
It varies from year to year, but and Tom, I know you see my data every year, but I think on average we're putting between 75,
You might still
give
be
or
on
take.
mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Lauren.
Okay, well, Tom, you can reiterate about 75, 75 bands on average per year. Okay, 75 bands per year usually.
Let's see, we have another question from Reg. Do you ever use student volunteers to help with banding?
Yeah, hi, Reg. Yeah, we do. On occasion, we have folks that'll reach out to us and say that they're interested. So as long as there's basically a certified bander there to be able to kind of give some guidance and training, we'll have folks come along. And like you can see in this picture, that's actually me and my daughter. That was a good number of years ago, but we like to have folks come along to learn about it. It's a great way to kind of get hands-on and get to see it up close. And so we do like to have folks come along. So it's something you're interested in, just send us an email there. And generally the timing for banding, we start usually the 1st of July, and then we band generally through mid-August. So I would say if you can send us an email there in PGC comments at pa.gov, probably sometime in June, and depending on where you live, we can get you paired up with the nearest bander. We have banders all over the state, and you can take a day and get out with them and see what it's all about. And it is a really neat activity to be able to share with folks, and we would really encourage you, if you're interested, to come along. This year was a little bit different. We were hoping to get people out, but then of course with COVID, we weren't actually able to take anyone out as we had planned. It was just employees, but we're hoping things change for next year. So just touch base with us, I'd say, in June if you're interested, and we'd love to get you involved.
Thanks.
And Lauren, maybe. Yeah, I'm sorry, Lori. Lauren, I'm sure you have done quite a bit of that down at Middle Creek there, taking people out and
Yep.
showing them.
We do, and I hope that you guys can hear me okay, but we do take people out. We usually take students out duck banding just because we're banding longer than doves, and we do it twice a year, but dove banding for sure. If you hit it just right, you can come out with us dove and duck banding. So for students that are interested in getting in the field, that's an excellent way that they can kind of get both those hands-on experiences.
Yeah.
Great. Reg said he's going to share that with his students. Ezra said he loved the presentation. Rachel is asking, Do either of you know what the hunter reporting rate is like?
Boy,
for
that's a
doves?
that's a good question, Rachel. So really, it's kind of dependent, and I don't have it offhand, to be honest with you. We do our recovery rate's about 2 to 5% of what's actually banded, but reporting rate's kind of a separate issue, and so that's where we use that reward banding actually to get at the reporting rate, and that's why we make those $100. It's been there's been research out there that it actually takes about $100 reward to get 100% of the people to report those bans. So so every time we make a change on a ban, so these bans used to have actually an address on there that would say right to, and then there was it was basically the bird banding lab. You'd send a letter with the ban that you recovered, and they would then send you information through the mail. And then it went to a right to and a call in number. So there was a 1-800 number. And so when anytime there's a change, that also could mean a change in reporting rate. So then we generally will do another research project using the reward bands and determine what the reporting rate is based on that. And then recently we went away from the 1-800 number and went to the just the email address there, or the web address where you can just log on and log in your information. And so actually had to do a reward band study again to determine what reporting rate is. So my apologies, I don't have that information on hand. I can get back to you with it as far as what the most recent reporting rate is. But that's a great question, and it's one that we really have to get to the bottom of so that we have an idea, when you need that reporting rate to be able to plug into your overall kind of population estimate tool. So yeah, great question, and unfortunately I just don't have the answer right in front of me, but I will work on getting that for you.
Thanks, Tom. We have a question from Joe. He says he's been reading all about the songbirds migrating over Pennsylvania right now, and he's curious, are the mourning doves part of that big migration that's happening?
Yeah, good question, Joe. So a lot of the doves will actually, they're not going to migrate quite as soon as some of the other like passerines that we see coming down, say out of Canada, or even up to the Northeast in the US. A lot of like the warblers and things like that will kind of get started early. And then doves seem like they kind of will get off a little bit later, usually in the fall. And it's generally like cold weather that will start to kind of push them down, the ones that are going to migrate long distance. And part of that is just because of how long doves will actually nest and raise a brood. So doves will start nesting as early as March, but we still have some nesting actually sometimes into October, trying to bring a brood off, which I don't think there's a ton of success that late in the year, but depending on what the weather's like. But doves can actually have up to 6 nests a year, and even with success, and they'll continue to nest, which is, again, that's why there's so many, even though they generally only have two eggs or 2 nestlings at a time. They will nest. They have a long nesting season, longer than pretty much every other bird. And Lauren, I don't know if you have anything else as far as what you're seeing there at Middle Creek as far as migrants starting to come through. Maybe you're seeing some stuff moving there.
Yeah, we this past week, I think it was the 13th and the 14th, were really great migration days, mostly for smaller songbirds, including a group of birds called warblers. And we have quite a few people that enjoy coming to Middle Creek to bird and to photograph all of the wildlife that comes here. And we had a lot of reports of birds moving through. Can't speak specifically to doves. And since we've been banning waterfowl recently, we've been seeing a lot of migration associated with that as well. So, but yeah, really, really neat stuff to see all those birds kind of come in at once.
Thanks. Let's see, we've got a couple more questions. Do we ban every bird that we catch in the traps? And does it hurt the bird?
Yeah, very good questions. So we do try to ban every bird that we catch. Now, depending on how many bans you have left, I've had days where I might be running 25, 30 traps, and we try to check those at least once an hour. We don't want to leave those birds in the trap for any length of time. But I might have a string of 25 bans that I need to get out, and I might catch 30, 40, 50 birds in a day. So there might be some birds that I end up leaving out at the end there, just because I ran out of bans. So we don't necessarily ban every bird in the traps, and that's kind of why. And as far as does it hurt, another good question. It does not. So what we try to do, again, we try to check those traps once an hour. We don't want those birds to spend any length of time in there, particularly if it's out in the sun. We don't want to cause any potential heat exhaustion or anything like that. Again, we keep them in those cloth bags to keep them comfortable. And like we mentioned, it's primarily to protect themselves if they're flapping their wings. We don't want them to kind of hit their wings against the ground or against the trap very hard. Once doves, the good thing with doves is once they get into the trap, they don't seem to realize they're trapped, or even when they do, they don't get too excited about it. So there are some birds that when they're trapped, they get pretty excited about it and try to get out as quickly as possible. But doves will generally just continue to feed or walk around or just sit down. So they're actually a joy to trap and to handle because of that. And we have, occasionally we'll have an injury, maybe to a wing or something, but it's generally not a life-threatening injury. And oftentimes we can take some kind of a disinfectant that's specific for birds and put that on the wing, and they're perfectly fine. But yeah, very good questions.
All right,
Tom,
we've
I'm
got
just
3 or 4.
Sorry,
ahead,
Laurie. I
Lauren.
was going to add to Tom's thing is that we, Tom and I and people that are banding doves are all permitted to do this through the bird banding lab. And so there is a bander code of ethics, so to speak, that we follow. And a lot of research has been done on birds that are getting bans on, or even if down the road we put any kind of telemetry devices on a certain species, there's a lot of research that's done to make sure that those bans and devices don't hinder the bird during flight or even during their life cycle. So we're pretty picky about it.
Yeah, good addition, Lauren. Yeah, and that's why we use these very small aluminum bands that weigh almost next to nothing. And that for each bird species we ban, we have to take that into account, the weight of the band and how it's attached. And like Lauren said, it doesn't impede them when they're flying or feeding or what have you. But yeah, great addition, Lauren.
Thank you. All right, we've got maybe 3 or 4 more questions here to try and get to. Since we're talking about traps, what do you do with the traps at night, and do you ever have a problem with traps being stolen?
Yeah, good question. We generally don't. So when we're trapping, again, we're checking those traps once an hour. And so like a typical trapping day for me is I will get up and I will head to the location early. And again, remember, we're pre-baiting these for generally about 2 weeks. So we're getting the birds accustomed to coming to that specific location. So I'll go to the location, try to get there before light. I'll set the traps out, and then there's usually a rush of doves first thing in the morning. So a lot of times doves come off their roost and they want to feed. They don't have any food left in their crop. It's from overnight, it's been digested, and they need to feed first thing in the morning. And so I'll have traps out first thing, and I just generally make a circuit. Basically, if I have, say, 20, 30 traps out, I'll just put them out in a loop, and I will just continually run that loop, checking those traps. And then basically when I'm done trapping, all those traps go back in the truck and go home with me or back to the office. And then the same thing the next day, you put them all back out. So So we don't generally have trouble with them getting stolen or anything like that. Occasionally they'll get run over. We do put these in different places. A lot of times maybe like a farm lane. Doves like to find grit in gravel roads and things. So those are very attractive areas. So I've had a few run over by tractors and things like that, but because they are hard to see. But generally I try to flag them. So that's not a problem, and certainly make sure that whoever the landowner is that is allowing us to trap there knows where they're at and is aware of them. But yeah, we don't generally have any trouble losing them as far as it goes with being stolen, and that's primarily because we take them home every day.
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Ezra wants to know, how many years does a dove live?
Oh man, that's a great question, Ezra. Yeah, so it's really dependent. The average lifespan of a dove, from what we've found from our banding data and harvest data, is about 1.2 years. So as with most wildlife species that are like doves or in the similar class, they don't live very long. They're not very long lived. But I say that, but we've had, there was a banded bird that was recaptured in Florida, I believe it was, that was 30 years old. And I think the longest recovery we've had in Pennsylvania was around 8.5 years old. So there's certainly birds out there that can live a long time, and 30 years is a long time for a small bird like this. That's exceptionally long. But again, on average, it's about 1.2 years is the average lifespan of a dove from what we've found.
Thanks, Tom. That's pretty interesting. But one more question, and this is from Sarah. Sarah says she's really enjoyed the presentation and she would like to know if you guys would be willing to talk a little bit about your education, your degrees and experience, what the Game Commission looks for in prospective wildlife biologists or biological managers, like someone that may be interested in a career like yours. What might you share with them? And that'll be our last question today.
Sure. Yeah, and Lauren will be able to talk well to this as well. So as soon as I'm done, I'm going to turn it over to her. But yeah, awesome question, Sarah. And you know, the wildlife fields are pretty small fields, but it's also very generally specific. And so generally, the path that you'd want to explore is a minimum of a bachelor's degree. And there's a lot of good schools, even local schools within Pennsylvania or right around us, that have a good 4-year wildlife and fishery science degree or something similar. You can go with a biology degree if you would like, but I think it does help a little bit to kind of get fairly specific, even with that undergrad degree. And then to move up from there, it's particularly into like the research side of things. It's generally recommended to get a master's degree in wildlife or conservation biology or something similar. And with that master's degree, and why it's important for like the research side, is you'll have your own project, which is what's called your thesis project, and you'll select a species or an ecosystem or something that you'd work directly with. And basically you would plan that project and you would, you know, execute that plan and see it through, and then you would write up a research basically summary, which would be your thesis. And so that's kind of the main reason why in our field today, having a master's that's related to wildlife or conservation biology is so critical. But there's other, you know, at least in my own case, I started up at Penn State Du Bois. They have a 2-year wildlife technology degree, and that was a good way to then transition to a 4-year degree with Penn State down at main campus, and that was wildlife and fishery science. And then from there, I actually got into the workforce and became a biologist, but I always had wanted to get into becoming a game bird biologist, and I knew in order to get into the research side, I would need to go back and get my master's. So then I found a good program actually up in Vermont and got my master's degree with focus in conservation biology, and my work was based on woodcock, so something fairly similar. But there's some good schools around, and I'll let Lauren kind of share her story as well and her thoughts on it. But you know, I would encourage you, Sarah, if you're interested, to try to get out with some biologists. Again, just shoot us an email and let us know you're interested, and we can try to get you out on some of the things that we do. And there might be a specific species you're interested in, and we can try to get you out on that to see if that's really something that you're interested in, and talk more about, you know, what it looks like day to day and what that path looks like. But Lauren, maybe you could share your thoughts and your experience on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tom, and thanks for covering. You covered a lot of what I would have said as well. And I went to Delaware Valley University, and my major there was wildlife management and conservation. I do not have my master's. However, my position that I perform at Middle Creek isn't so much research based. I do help our Bureau of Wildlife Management with banding efforts, such as the dove banding effort that we're talking about here. But my job lends me more to dealing with the public, and also some of the controlled hunts that we have at Middle Creek as well. So I think the biggest thing to consider is that when people think about this field, they think there's only a few options, one being a biologist, the other one maybe being a game warden. But the field is actually, it's small, but there's a lot of diversity within the jobs. And there's a lot of diversity besides just the state system. There's a lot of nonprofits, the federal government as well, that you can work for. And one of the things I recommend to students that are interested in exploring the field is to, you can use resources like Texas A&M Job Board. Find a job on there that looks like something that is what you're looking for, what you would like to do, and look at their qualifications and see what they want. So for example, if you would like to be a big game biologist out west, a lot of those states require you to have your master's. And as Tom mentioned, if you want to be a research biologist, getting your master's is kind of a good thing to think about. One of the things that I see with my position is that I wish I would have taken a few more communication classes to work with the public. A lot of times students are getting into this field because they would rather work with wildlife or animals instead of people. And by nature of how it ends up happening is you end up working with people more than you think that you will. So any kind of communication classes are super helpful, but just being flexible, understanding that you might not end up being a biologist in your backyard is important. Tom and I have had the ability to move around a little bit with our job before we've been full-time with the agency, the Game Commission. So it's a great opportunity to explore a lot of different locations. But just, you know, persistence within the field. It's a small field. It can be difficult to navigate sometimes, but it's extremely rewarding. And I'm sure Tom can speak to this as well. But we wake up probably every day really enjoying what we do. And that's a big thing that, if you can say that at the end of the day.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Tom. Well, we are at the 1 hour mark, so we're going to wrap it up. The session has been recorded, so we will get that link out to everybody in an email. It will also be uploaded to the Game Commission's YouTube page. I'd just like to thank Tom and Lauren for sharing their expertise with us today, and we'd also like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. We hope you'll visit us again to learn more about Pennsylvania wildlife in upcoming webinars, and if there's something you're dying to learn about, please send us an email to let us know so we can try and cover it in a future program. And in the meantime, we hope you're able to get outside and enjoy some of Pennsylvania's great outdoors. Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.